priceless ancient treasures torn out of the ground. Precious art ripped from walls and sold to the highest bidder.
22, 24, 26.
Welcome to a multi-billion-dollar black market nobody wants to talk about. Until now, the grandest of mankind's achievements reduced to obscene commodities. The spoils snatched up by wealthy collectors from shady middlemen, laundered through a network of liars and thieves. It's a global crime wave, where the cash ends up in the pockets of the world's worst criminals. While nobody asks the big questions, how can it still be happening? Welcome to a modern tragedy. History itself, dug up, destroyed, sold off. This is loot. There are almost no limits to what money can buy. Land, influence, beautiful things, and ancient art. The thriving black market in antiquities exists for one reason: to supply illegal treasures to the filthy rich who covet them. These dealers don't always do business in the shadows. They're comfortable rubbing shoulders with the rich and famous. They talk the same language as their cashed-up clients. They get them what they want and are paid handsomely for it.
The art market is not this beautiful place full of colors and lights, but it's a really dark, dirty place full of illicit objects that came recently from the ground and full of fabricated stories which are through and through false, much more than we have imagined.
In a world where nothing is off limits, the right antiquity can make even the most sensible buyers lose their minds. And when one of the greatest ancient Greek works of art ever created appears on the market, it'll cause a feeding frenzy. It will bring a huge payday for some, but it'll come at a cost. A global scandal will bring down big names who sell their souls for a ticket to the good life, while others end their days in disgrace. At 7.5 feet tall, she's a 2,500-year-old supermodel. Her body's carved from limestone, and her head and limbs crafted from solid marble imported from a distant Greek island. The skillful curves and clingy drapery are the work of a master, so much so that she's likened to the famous Parthenon statues carved by ancient Greek maestro Phidias. But that's pretty much all that's known about her, other than the place she probably used to call home. Scientists study the limestone used for her body. They discovered tiny fossils unique to a quarry in Sicily. It matches material used in the ancient city of Morgantina, an area rich in volcanic soil. It's an area key to the ancient Greek push into Italy. So it seems she's a Greek creation made in Italy. Thousands of years later, the sculpture is such a head-turner that when she first appears on the scene in 1988, people assume she's Aphrodite, the goddess of love. This goddess is made to be worshipped, created to be front and center in an ancient Greek temple. But nobody knows her name, because when she makes her public debut, it's as if she appeared out of thin air. She's the most impressive Greek sculpture outside Greece and Great Britain, but she's never been seen in public, and nobody's ever written about her. That can only mean one thing.
You could look at it like I look at it, and you could say, well, this piece has no history. That means it's stolen. If it wasn't stolen, it would have history.
If a well-meaning collector wants to buy an object which is on the market legally, how can they proceed if there is no ownership history? Do they have to then engage in an expensive and long drawn-out process of research of their own to try and establish the ownership history, or do they buy it and take a chance? And unfortunately, I think too many individuals and institutions are taking the line that, well, we'll buy it and take a chance.
Hazy history aside, it's fitting that the goddess makes her modern debut in a place with more idols than anywhere else on Earth: Malibu, California. She takes pride of place in the Getty Villa, Pacific Palisades, an expansive property dedicated to art and antiquities. The Getty Villa is built by billionaire collector J. Paul Getty. Although Getty dies before his dream is completed, the $1.2 billion he puts in a trust ensures the museum's future and its ability to compete in the marketplace for coveted antiquities.
The museum J. Paul Getty himself had built but never visited, a copy of a 1st century Roman villa. An English resident, Getty hated flying, so he never saw the replica statues in the garden or how the real ones he'd collected were exhibited.
By the late 1980s, the Getty Museum has $100 million to spend on acquisitions. By comparison, New York's famous Met Museum only has a paltry $17 million. So how on earth does our ancient goddess find her way from beneath the Italian soil to the sunny shores of California? Getty always had a fondness for Greek and Roman classical art. As he starts building the collection for his museum and its associated villa, he turns to a dealer known for sourcing the good stuff, London-based Robin Symes. Christos Siroyanis is a forensic archaeologist and the man instrumental in the eventual downfall of the shady dealers involved with the sale of the Sicilian goddess.
Robin Symes was originally an antiques and medieval furniture dealer with a small gallery in London in the mid-late 60s. In all senses, was the dealer, the businessman, the broker in this business. But Symes also, due to his vast experience in this kind of commerce, had developed also an eye to distinguish, the really good pieces among a bunch of all kinds of antiquities.
Robin Symes has a humble background, but he's ambitious and is always on the lookout for an opportunity. He's running a gallery on the King's Road when an unexpected visitor walks through the door. It'll change his life forever.
He met with Christos Michailidis, the young Christos Michailidis who has studied in London history of art, connected to the Papadimitriou ship-owning family. He walked into the gallery of Robin Symes trying to sell some antiquities, and that's how they met. And this eventually led to a story of cooperation, not only in business, but also in life. They started a business that flourished and led to being the ending point of trafficking chains from all over the world.
The connection between these two dealers is based on both business and pleasure. Symes leaves his wife and Christo, his girlfriend, and in 1970, they move in together. While Symes will deny the two men are in a relationship, friends call them Mr. and Mr. Symes. Lovers or not, there's no doubting the closeness of their business partnership. Both men bring something different to the table. Symes has contacts and an eye for antiquities. Michailidis is charismatic, and thanks to his family shipping company, he's loaded with cash.
Because of the financial support that they had from the Papadimitriou's family, they made themselves going up the ladder of the official antiquities trade internationally, ending up to be the ending point and the biggest dealers in the world from early to mid-80s until early 2000s.
The flashy Brit and his worldly partner set up a gallery in ritzy St. James Ormond Yard. It's a roaring success. They build their business into the biggest global antiquities dealing operation in modern times. Symes boasts that he's supplied antiquities to most of the world's biggest museums, and he's not exaggerating. But, as it'll turn out, not all of these treasures are above board. The source of many of the stolen artifacts? Italy. Like most places blessed with an embarrassment of ancient riches, there's far more beneath the Italian soil than archaeologists can handle. It's said that half the history of Greek and Roman culture in Italy has been stolen. Take the city of Pompeii. A third of the site has never been touched by researchers. That leaves plenty for the looters of the region to pillage.
So in Italy, looting is a problem. that we have been dealing with since antiquity at some extent. Especially in some areas of the south, we have seen that even in Pompeii, the last findings were under threat by potential looters as well. It's a problem, but it's a problem that this country is dealing with.
It's a gold mine for antiquities dealers happy to peddle loot. But high-end dealers like Symes and Michaelides don't want to get their own hands dirty. For that, they need an accomplice, someone on the ground. To know more about their star recruit, we need to wind back the clock to the 1950s. Giacomo Medici gets a taste for the trade as a child in Rome's Piazza Borghese. Medici works with his parents in the outdoor antiques market, selling small archaeological finds to tourists. In the 50s and 60s, these stalls could openly deal in looted artifacts.
Giacomo Medici was an Italian dealer in illicit antiquities, mainly. And he had the previous, let's say, excavation experience with his father, as it has been already published, before he becomes a dealer in antiquities himself.
But this is minor league. Medici is thinking bigger picture. When he's old enough, he buys a car and tours the Italian countryside with one thing on his mind: visiting Italy's biggest looting sites. He's looking to hook up with the gangs of Tumbaroli, tomb raiders. Ruthlessly efficient, they've turned looting into an art form. It's estimated Tumbaroli have raided 100,000 tombs across Italy.
But alongside these family businesses, as we might call them, you do have more organised criminal enterprises where the archaeological sites are just looked upon as something to be robbed, something to be stolen, something to generate profits.
90% of looting in Italy is the work of organized crime. It's an industrial-scale enterprise. With ancient settlements honeycombing the landscape, it's not hard to strike it rich. Meanwhile, Giacomo Medici rises through the ranks, ending up one of Tumbaroli's kingpins. He's running the entire northern Italy looting operation by the time he hits 25. In 1967, Medici has a setback when he cops a 3-month conviction for illicit trading. Rattled by prison time, he packs it up and heads for Geneva in the 1970s. But he's not rattled enough to mend his ways. If anything, the lax Swiss laws work in his favor. Business is booming. Medici is happy to splash the cash, buying himself a seaside compound and a Maserati to go with it. But he struggles to grow his business any further. He's too close to the dirty end of the business for cashed-up collectors. They want to stay at arm's length from the crooks who provide the fodder for their collections. And Medici is a looter through and through.
The physical distance and the cognitive distance from these acts of more traditional crime give collectors a space to sort of deny the harm in their own actions. The issue is that they don't necessarily see their collecting behavior as linked to these crimes.
To spread his loot across the globe, he'll need to get a foot in the door of international dealers. For that, he'll need Robin Symes and Christo Michaelides. By the late 1980s, these 3 men have cornered the market in ancient Greek and Roman loot. It's alleged in a single year, Symes and Michaelides could shift $12 million worth of loot supplied by Medici. The trio will rule the roost for decades. And it's a slick operation. Medici provides the goods, and Symes' business enterprise gives the whole affair a sheen of legitimacy. Symes is what's sometimes called a gentleman dealer.
There were these dealers who were very cultured, very urbane. They had connections to the world of museums, rich collectors. They were very at ease in high-class society. For all intents and purposes, they belonged in high-class society. People trusted them.
Medici knows all too well that he struck gold through his friendship with Symes. The English dealer has the world's biggest collectors on speed dial, including a certain Malibu-based museum with one hell of an acquisitions budget. Enter Marion True. She starts out in 1982 as a curatorial assistant at the Getty Museum. Back then, the Getty's best known for spending a fortune on fakes. When a scandal-plagued colleague resigns, she takes the reins as curator of the Getty Antiquities collection in 1986. Symes is respectable, Michaelides is charming and loaded, and the treasures they find are irresistible. Marion True is on the hook, and the Getty becomes one of the pair's biggest customers. But she's not going into this with her eyes closed. Marion True knows, as well as anyone else, the risks of buying antiquities. In an internal memo in 1987, she describes the antiquities market as corrupt. She also acknowledges that most of the antiquities on the market are looted. So True pushes through a new acquisition policy for the Getty. There will be no more purchases with dodgy provenance. She's also willing to return stolen antiquities to their countries of origin. It's one of the toughest policies for a museum of its kind. So what goes wrong? Well, sometimes it all comes down to the company you keep.
Marion True was able to frequently travel around the world, including Europe, and started having meetings with all these dealers, even if one supplied the other and so on, and discussing with them about acquisitions, in many cases acquiring objects for the Getty Museum.
It's such a disconnected kind of enterprise, a lot of middlemen in between. No one really knows where these objects ultimately derive from and from how, and sometimes they don't bother to really pay attention to. So you do have this dangerous relationship of curators who are ignorant or who don't care, who are not necessarily being monitored or are not monitoring these kinds of activities.
There's no doubt Marion True knows right from wrong. But she also has an insatiable appetite for ancient art. It's a conflicted position to be in. So when Robin Symes gets his hands on a once-in-a-lifetime masterpiece, he knows who to call. In 1988, he invites Marion True to his Battersea warehouse. What she sees takes her breath away. A larger-than-life statue. It's the goddess. And she knows it's one of a kind.
To the words of the Getty Museum, this statue was the best statue that could ever a museum have in the whole Western Hemisphere.
Symes has a backstory ready for the stunning statue. Well, kind of. He claims it's been in the collection of a Swiss supermarket magnate since the 1930s. It's all rubbish, of course. Symes avoids any definitive historical provenance by remaining as vague as possible.
The main way Robin Symes was forging provenance was in reality not talking about provenance at all. There are a vast amount of objects in the market that passed from his and Christos Michaelides' hands where there is no provenance at all when they surfaced in the market or when they were being sold in private collections.
In actual fact, far from being sourced from a respected Swiss magnate, Symes bought the incredible piece in 1986 from a tobacco shop owner, of all people. Purchase price? A humble $400,000. Just 2 years later, he presented the statue to Marion True with a ticket price of $18 million. Turning a profit of $17.5 million in just 2 years? That's the kind of magic a dealer like Robin Symes can conjure. But Marion True works for Getty. Money isn't a problem, and it's one of the finest artifacts she's ever seen, despite its condition. The goddess has been broken into 3 pieces, and True's got to know this is a favorite method for smuggling loot.
The statue arrived shown in 3 pieces. Apparently, either she saw it in 3 pieces or it has been just put together, the 3 pieces, one on top of the other, to form the statue, and still bearing soil on its surface.
This alone should have been a huge red flag.
being the chief curator of the antiquities department in the wealthiest and one of the most famous museums around the world, surely must have known that this is a very, very dangerous piece to touch.
The world of curating is a cutthroat business. Everyone's out to create the most mind-blowing catalog. But putting such a collection together is an ethical minefield.
There are a number of reasons why a museum may choose to overlook the problematic nature of an object that they would like to acquire. There's a sense of competition. There's a desire, a very human desire among the people involved in the institution to have the best of something, to acquire the best of something, to overlook the problems with something beautiful.
It can often boil down to one simple fact. If they don't get their hands on the loot, someone else will.
So many of these private collectors are buying off the black market, objects that we will never see or we will never know how they were smuggled. And eventually, in 10, 15 years, these private collectors are going to give a collection of stolen material to these museums, because they want more funding to flow into their budgets, they're going to accept such stolen objects.
Unfortunately, negotiating with dealers like Robin Symes is part and parcel of being a museum curator. And the rules of engagement for people like Marion True, when it comes to sources, don't ask and don't tell, which plays right into Symes' tactic of vague historical records.
What we see a lot of is collectors depending on ambiguities in the provenance histories of the objects they're buying. The background and history of a piece, its ownership history, where it came from, how it was exported and imported, to almost form their own backstories of why this piece is okay, even if other pieces aren't. This is extremely risky.
But by willfully ignoring the obvious, True will eventually be undone. Because our goddess has a very checkered past. It will take decades to unravel her story. But in the 2000s, Interpol and the Italian Art Squad will learn that an anonymous looter unearthed her in Morgantina, Italy, in the late 70s or early 80s. She was broken into 3, shipped to Switzerland, and sold to Symes. Then, she met Marion True. But the newly minted curator of the world's wealthiest museum knows none of what the future holds. Meanwhile, Symes has given her enough information to allow her to turn a blind eye. Deep down, she must know something smells a bit off. But it's hard to turn down such a treasure.
Curators are in a position very similar to that of academics, they are highly invested in the objects and they are in continuous contact, of course, with dealers, collectors. There is a high danger there to get caught in illicit or unethical habits.
Despite the Italian Cultural Ministry having no record of the sculpture's source, the Getty's ready to sign on the dotted line. Then, a bombshell. A rumor surfaces. The goddess was swiped from Morgantina. Under pressure, True reaches out to archaeologists at the 1,000-acre dig site. The area is enormous, and excavators have only scratched the surface. Which means they can't say for certain if the goddess was found there. It's 1988. And the Getty Museum Board gives True the go-ahead on the sale, with one unprecedented stipulation. The Getty Trust demands collateral from Robin Symes to protect the museum if the statue is found to be looted. It's a sign that the museum isn't completely comfortable with the story Symes has given them. But they go ahead with the purchase anyway. This is the balancing act that's part and parcel of working in the world of big museums, where success is judged by ticket sales and visitor numbers.
Some museums, at least, are under pressure to develop large collections of material, and they want to be seen to be a museum of international standing or a world-beating museum collection. And to do this, they have to get important objects.
Because it's not just supposedly trusted dealers they must dance with, but questionable collectors as well.
I think most material in museums, that it's not actually bought on the market, it's donated to them by private collectors. And where do you get important antiquities from these days? Because most important antiquities that came out of countries legally decades or centuries ago, they're already known, they're already in collections. They're not, they only come up on the market very rarely.
Wealthy collectors give museums exciting new antiquities. And if they're lucky, there'll be a healthy cash donation as well.
Collectors often have quite close relationships with museums, and museums see collectors as being potential donors, not just of money, but of the actual objects themselves. The decisions that collectors have made about the purchasing of certain objects and certain types of objects then end up influencing museums, because these are the objects that they ultimately donate to the museums.
Donating antiquities isn't always just about philanthropy and doing good. Collectors who donate to a not-for-profit museum can claim a tax write-off, play their cards right, and they can even turn a profit.
In the US, a collector can decide to donate one of his items to a charity, let's say a non-profit organization, like a museum, a university. After the donation, the collector is supposed to file his tax statements and can ask to be somehow paid off for the donation. But the payoff is made on the basis not of the price that the donor has paid for the object, but for something that is called the fair market value.
Before the practice was stamped out, you could donate something you bought for $100 to a museum. They give it a bloated valuation of $1,000, and come tax time, you can claim the $1,000 donation as a deduction. A neat trick. Marion True's predecessor at the Getty, Jerry Frell, was accused of doing just this. Over a 10-year period, it's said that he brought $15 million worth of antiquities into the museum by dangling this carrot to collectors. Meanwhile, the new Getty curator is rubbing shoulders with dealers and collectors who will land her in a world of pain. But no one would know it at the time. Symes and Christo present as respectable, worldly peers, worthy of rubbing shoulders with their wealthy counterparts. And the couple play the part brilliantly. By the 1990s, Symes is pulling in nearly $4.5 million a year. They have homes in London and New York, and an estate in the Greek Isles. They fly private around the world, and are chauffeured in their choice of either Bentley or Rolls, depending on their mood. But they're living a lie, with one foot in the criminal underworld and another in high society.
They're looking one way backwards at the criminal world, but they're looking another way forward in the high cultural world, and that's how they operate.
Like the Roman god Janus, who had two faces, one face that looked into the past and one face that looked into the future, a Janus figure in an antiquities smuggling chain is sort of the link between two worlds. For networks that focus on the movement, illicit trafficking and sale of many large or high-value antiquities, research has shown that these Janus figures are integral to the functioning of these networks, that you need someone in some position that has the ability to clean these antiquities, or elite collectors just can't buy them.
For many, dealers like Robin Symes and Christo Michaelides are the worst of the worst. Because while they live it up, the people they're exploiting pay a heavy price.
We know that at the last bit of this chain, there are looters that very often are poor people exploited by middlemen and by those dealers who really make huge money in countries like the United Kingdom, the US, and others. It's a form of exploitation, that one as well. So I point the finger more to buyers, dealers, and academics rather than looters.
Not that Marion True seems bothered by this. She visits the two dealers whenever she's in London and joins them at their estate on the idyllic island of Shanusa. True seems completely caught up in their world. In a way, it's inevitable. As a curator, building relationships with dealers and collectors is just part of the job. Trick is knowing when it's gone too far. And for dealers, having a curator on the inside can be invaluable for spruiking antiquities they have for sale.
Many dealers in antiquities time their offerings and create promotions or focus what they're dealing at particular moments based around blockbuster exhibitions in museums, both because they can share a little bit in the publicity. Collectors and members of the public who see these items in museums get excited about them, then turn to dealers looking for the same thing.
Meanwhile, despite the roaring trade, countries like Italy are not content to sit back and allow the ransacking without fighting for what they've lost. And there's a growing consensus that the magnificent sculpture at the Malibu Museum should never have left Italy, despite its new name, the Getty Goddess.
Called the Getty Goddess because the Morgantina Aphrodite would have given away the place where it has been looted from, and therefore it remained there until the Italian authorities started researching the case.
As years roll by, the Italians gather more and more evidence the statue came from Sicily. But on July the 4th, 1999, one freak accident will bring the whole house of cards tumbling down. Dealers Robin Symes and Christo Michaelides are dining with friends in Terni, Umbria. Christo Michaelides decides to go in search of cigarettes and never returns. He's found unconscious after tripping and hitting his head. He dies from his injuries, and the accident triggers the unraveling of an international web. Michaelides' grieving family and Robin Symes fall into a bitter financial dispute.
Robin Symes refused to split the business and the antiquities and the proceedings, to share actually the business with the members of the family.
The Michaelides family want half the couple's assets, but Symes claims his partner was merely an employee of the business. The family is livid. Lawyers freeze Symes' bank accounts and bring a civil case against him.
Robin Symes was sued by the family and eventually lost the case. He was declared bankrupt.
The family send investigators in to uncover any antiquities hidden by Symes, and they find them. Evidence of 17,000 objects stashed in 33 warehouses. Their value, $250 million in today's money. Despite this, it isn't the loot that lands Symes in prison in 2005.
He also was convicted not for antiquities trafficking, but for twice for contempt of court. And he ended up in prison serving about 8 months.
I mean, laws are great, but let's face it, laws are often flouted. They are not always effective, even if they sound great on paper.
So in the end, Symes' time in the slammer has nothing to do with antiquities smuggling.
It's very rare for people on the market end of the antiquities smuggling chain who engage in crimes not only to be successfully prosecuted for those crimes, but to even be charged or investigated, or at times even detected. And I think this rests a lot in their white-collar status and the nature of white-collar crime.
With Symes permanently out of business, what of his partner in crime, Giacomo Medici? His downfall had its origins in the strange netherworld of free ports, a supposed safe haven for the rich and famous. Free ports are a jurisdictional oddity. Located in airports or train stations, high-value goods are stored there free of import duties. If something's sold and shipped out of the free port, there are no taxes on the sale either. And there's a bonus for antiquities thieves. If dealers can get an item, like an ancient Italian goddess sculpture, for instance, smuggled into a free port, they can hide it here until it's cleaned, physically and metaphorically.
It's an ideal location for dealers and private collectors to store all kinds of works of art for financial, tax, or any other reasons, including hiding them because of their illicit origin, until they are further being laundered or even going to be restored by professional restorers in order to remove all kinds of incriminating evidence that they bear.
Of course, Giacomo Medici sets himself up in a Geneva free port. And it will be his undoing. Because as the authorities turn up the heat in the 90s, they're ready to pounce.
The Italian authorities raided Giacomo Medici in Geneva, at the free port of Geneva, his warehouses, and they discovered thousands of recently looted antiquities, fragmented, broken pieces, that is, covered with soil and crustaceans.
That isn't the most interesting discovery. They also uncover an archive of thousands of Polaroids depicting looted antiquities, some still caked in mud and no longer in Medici's possession.
Which was the biggest discovery, to my opinion, much bigger than the antiquities themselves, because there were illustrated not all, but a vast amount of objects that have passed previously from the hands of Giacomo Medici and have been already sold to museums, private collections, auction houses, and other dealers' galleries.
It was this hoard of Polaroids that would ultimately link Giacomo Medici, the upstart looter, with Robin Symes, the disgraced dealer. In 2006, authorities raid another of Robin Symes' compounds. Amongst thousands more looted antiquities, they find a second archive of Polaroids. One man is given access to these archives. Christoph Siroyanis is a forensic archaeologist determined to bring down the looters. And this is the smoking gun he's been searching for.
These archives were given to me by official permission and personally to continue conducting my academic and other research in this area for notifying the authorities for new identifications that I'm making, to claim their stolen heritage, but also opening new criminal cases against either the same shady characters, even if they have been already convicted for other crimes, or for new characters that I identified that they have been involved in some cases.
Unsurprisingly, Giacomo Medici uses choice words when speaking about Christos Siroyanis. He accuses the Greek archaeologist of doing terrorism toward auction houses and museums. Christos's response to that?
It is very amusing to hear that from Giacomo Medici, that he is calling me a terrorist of museums and private collectors and auction houses, actually. But in reality, it is a medal for me and an acknowledgement of my research that is A, accurate, and B, it really has an actual and real life effect by identifying the objects and help the authorities around the world to take back their stolen cultural heritage.
It's a slam dunk. The Medici photographs show objects in their raw state, fresh out of the ground, dirty and in pieces, while the Symes archive shows the same artifacts, cleaned, restored, and ready for sale.
For the first time, to have a glimpse, a good glimpse, into the real world of the antiquities market and the trafficking behind it.
The archives also show that Medici is laundering antiquities by putting objects up at auction, then buying them back himself. A clever way to muddy the waters as to where the artifact actually came from.
And I do think that auction houses could do much better in terms of provenance research. It is astonishing how little background is provided in catalogs. And when you ask questions, as I did in 2014, very little is answered.
This idea of dealing in people's cultures should be deemed quite unethical. These antiquities dealers are there to fake export licenses, to create histories, fake histories for a newly looted object.
With the raid on Medici's Freeport warehouse uncovering thousands of looted antiquities and Polaroids, and his known links to Robin Symes, and by extension, Marion True, Italian authorities are gathering confidence in their mission to bring all those involved to justice, and ultimately, to bring the Morgantina goddess home. The next step is the trial of Giacomo Medici. In May 2005, he's convicted of receiving stolen goods, illegal export of goods, and trafficking. He's sentenced to 10 years in prison and fined $13.5 million. But of course, that's not how it plays out. An appeal dismisses the trafficking conviction and reduces the jail term to 8 years. And in a concession to his age, he's allowed to serve a reduced sentence of just 2 years under house arrest in his luxury villa.
Because the Italian law states that for someone who is over 70 years old and is not involved in a major crime like homicide, narcotics, and so on, Giacomo Medici, in this case, would not serve the conviction, the prison time behind bars.
Whether Medici got off lightly or not, his conviction is bad news for Marion True. Italian police move in for the kill. They're determined to make an example of the Getty and its curator. They've got the photographs and documents from Medici's warehouse that they say prove Marion True bought stolen property for the Getty. On April Fool's Day 2005, Marion True is charged in Italy with receiving stolen goods and conspiring with Giacomo Medici. The evidence list against her includes the Getty artifacts found in Medici's archive. It also includes the Morgantina goddess. She's ordered to stand trial in Rome. True denies all charges. As far as she's concerned, she's being hung out to dry. Although the Getty pays her legal fees and says she's being unfairly targeted, they stop short of backing her innocence. A few months later, the Getty hands Marion True her marching orders. It's got nothing to do with the trial, but a conflict of interest accusation. Marion True's trial is abandoned in 2010, once it ticks over the statute of limitations. For True, it ends in a nasty limbo. She hasn't been convicted, and she hasn't been acquitted. With Medici convicted, Symes permanently out of business, and True's career finished, attention turns to the woman at the center of the storm, the Morgantina goddess. When faced with photo evidence of the goddess stored in pieces in a tobacconist's basement, the Getty knows it's run out of time. In 2007, the museum agrees to return the Getty goddess, along with 39 other looted objects. In a gesture of goodwill, the Italians agree to let the Getty keep it on display until 2010. Not everyone thinks the Getty's willingness to cooperate is a great idea. Then director of the Met, Philippe de Montebello, questions what he calls the zeal with which the United States is embracing foreign laws that deprive its citizens of important objects. But for people from lands that have been used as cultural convenience stores by wealthy nations for hundreds of years, it's a move in the right direction.
Without properly addressing the historical imbalance in the power and the historical crimes of cultural appropriation in Western museums, we would not be able to stop the looting.
Ultimately, these objects should be returned back to their point of origin. They should be returned back to the country where they came from and remain in contact with the people. These items represent part of their history.
I used to think that institutions like the British Museum or other major museums do a great service, and they still sort of do in some ways. But I also recognize that the objects they hold are robbing people effectively of their heritage. And I think people have the right to their objects. A lot of smaller museums and private organizations that have a particular agenda often buy objects, and they sometimes are ignorant to what's happening. They're buying objects that are illegal to really purchase.
Museums in the Western Hemisphere, they are just one big part, of course, of the problem. They are receivers, effectively, of stolen goods.
Museums really can't be buying artifacts because what is there to buy? So it's very hard to find anything unless it has a really, really good record.
So should museums keep building their antiquities collections at all? There are those who argue that the idea of the universal museum should go the way of the dodo.
This notion of the universal museum, I think, is a very imperialist idea, because we don't find any of these universalist museums in countries that, I hate to say this word, in the source countries. We do not find universalist museums in Cairo or in Baghdad. We only find them in Western museums.
Most large museums today are certainly more careful than they were in the past in terms of buying objects. It's not completely true for all museums. There are still some major Western museums that appear to be buying looted antiquities, but most try to keep a more careful relationship.
Museums have become the playground of the rich and fabulous. And in a world where money can buy almost anything, there's plenty of pushback against this idea. In a 2015 interview with the Washington Post, Marion True makes a concession of sorts. She still denies being part of an illicit trafficking ring. But did she buy looted art for the Getty? Yes, she did. How could she not? She admits. It was everywhere. She's also become philosophical about museums. She no longer thinks they need to own the things they exhibit. Marion True would like to see a world where collecting institutions fund excavations and loan some of the finds to exhibit, but not own them. If that were to happen, she believes it would be the end of the black market in looted antiquities. Although justice may not have been well served by the fate of those involved. As for the goddess, in 2011, she returns home in a fairy tale ending. Denis is a hilltop village with 6,000 or so residents. Its museum is housed in a 17th century monastery that showcases the most important finds from the nearby ruins of Morgantina. Today, the goddess takes center stage. When she was at the Getty, about 400,000 people paid her a visit annually. The Denis Museum clocks 17,000 visitors a year. There are those who think it's wrong that something so beautiful could be stuck in a rural backwater. But to the locals, this is a watershed moment, the homecoming of their most famous resident. Their greatest hope? That it marks a new chapter for the region and fosters greater pride in the unrivaled history beneath its soil, and that it might encourage locals to help treasure and protect what is rightfully theirs.